because he's been a coach, he has lots and lots of practical things to tell you and share with you. And I have more theoretical things because that's more my style. So anyway, we're here to talk tonight about effective communication skills. And I can tell you one thing. In my lifetime, I've never heard somebody say, don't tell me anything. Don't communicate with me. I don't want to know. Nobody likes to be left in the dark. And communication skills are important. And we have to learn how to give people enough information so that we're transparent and clear, but not so much information that we drown them. But also go back and not leave out things, right, that are essential. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And we're glad that you're with us. So, Coach, it's to you.
Yeah, I would just say I fire hose people and see what sticks when I communicate sometimes, but depends on what it is too. Everybody says that, I guess because of my echoic ear, that if I keep talking and stuff, I'll work it out on my own. That's what my wife tells me. She's like, and then at the end of 5 minutes, I go, oh, this would be a good idea. And she goes, oh, okay, good luck to you.
Well, and I think that it's important that you should also share that you may do fire hosing, but you will also go back and explain again and again and again and again, right? And so that's important to understand too, because a lot of times when you get a lot of information, you can't sort it all together at once. But if somebody will come back and repeat for you, it makes it helpful. So that's just kind of a general tip on communication. I don't know of anybody who gets it after just one try.
Well, and you can I can break it down too. So I can fire hose, but then I can do, let's say that in the end there were 15 items, but then I can break them down into smaller chunks of 3. Or if we need to go back and then I need to say 1.1, 1.12, I can do that as well. So I have my preferred style like we all do, but I've learned over the years that just because my style is a certain way doesn't mean that other people, that's their best style. So I try to be able to figure out, I call it being a caption reader. I try to read their caption, and I know we talk to a lot of people and we say, what's your typical learning style? Is it visual, auditory? Do you like to touch the bases, as I say, and then come back and go deep, or different things like that? And it's hard because we can't just change to everybody's style if there's a room full of 20, but you can try to get as many styles as possible, talking with your hands, making sure that they have something to write with if they're kinesthetic or different things of that nature.
Absolutely. And we've talked before about north, south, east, west, which are types of people. North being very results oriented, get it done, right? And don't understand the word no. It means that I just have to find another way to do it. And then a south who's very, very wants everybody to be on the page, everybody to get along, everybody to agree. And then the east is a person who talks about the big picture at the highest level, right? They're 100,000 feet above ground, and they're talking about the future state. And then you have west, who like all the details, right? I want every single detail. And no one is a total purist, right? We're probably a northwest or southeast or whatever. But anyway, the point that's important is this. If you really want to build a relationship with someone, you've got to try and, if you're going to them, you need to try and go as close to their style as possible so they can learn from it when it's one-on-one. But by the same token, when they want to talk to you, they need to come in your style, right? Because it's a give and take. So if I want to be the communicator, I need to try and hit, well, like Brett said, as many styles as you can. But if it's one-on-one, I'm going to try and hit your style so that you're comfortable and I can move forward. So communication isn't easy, but I think most people appreciate it.
I'm Northwest. If you ever come to me, I'm Northwest. Uh-oh. Did we lose Jima? Oh, okay. You're back. No, we lost the audio and the visual.
There she is.
Okay, so I didn't do anything to make it come back. It just came back. So anyway, do you want to say anything else, Brett, before we let Robert ask a question?
No, I just said if anybody comes to me, I'm a Northwest, just so we're all clear.
Okay. And that's a true statement.
Remember that, Robert, Northwest, buddy.
Yes, sir.
Results and details.
There you go.
All right.
All right. First
So,
question. Oh, yeah. First question is what are the
yeah,
key
go ahead.
components? What are the key components of effective communication?
Well, there's this old saying that says you have two ears and one mouth, use them in that proportion. So I would tell you that communication, a lot of times we think it's about how we speak, how we present, and certainly that's a part of it, but it's really also about how we listen. And when we listen, we need to listen with our hearts as well as with our ears, and we need to be watchful of what people are communicating. There was a special last night on TV about Ronald Reagan, and he was known as a great communicator. And he read the room, right? And so Brett was talking about caption reading, so I don't want to say much more about that, but he could read the room and he knew based on what he was observing how to communicate. And so sometimes he told stories, sometimes he made jokes, sometimes he did that pregnant pause, right, where you just wait. And then he popped in one of the things, there was this audience cheering him about for his second term that he was going to do that. And we want you to run, we want you to run, blah, blah, blah. And he had this long pause and he said, well, I think we're working on that right now. Right. So he was just able to stay in the moment. So I think that to be effective in communication, you have to listen, really listen to understand, not to respond. And then I believe that you have to pay attention to all the context and surroundings and then speak. So Coach, I'll send that to you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there for effective communication skills. So I would break it down as the two people, right? So there's a two-way street that goes back and forth with communication. The second way I would break it down is that there's all the different, again, styles of communication. So, and maybe that's not the correct terminology, but there's the nonverbals, right? Where people are crossing their arms or they look grumpy or whatever, which is me most of the time, but I'm just really focused kind of guy. Or, for me, there's the art of it, like a Ronald Reagan who just had the art form to it, and he was able to read the room and make adjustments from there. But you also have the science to it. You have the person that's listening. Are they active listening? Are they shaking their head? Are they saying back to you? And now this is what I think I heard you say. Is this correct? Red monkey on Wednesday. You're like, no, it was a blue giraffe on Thursday. We talked about that with the telephone game. So I think there's a lot there. I think the best you can make your language concise. I think it could be the tone, it could be the speed, it could be the right. There's all of these things that matter, so to speak. And I know that they say some of the most effective communicators that they'll be talking, maybe looking away from the person, and then when they make their greatest point, they'll look right into the camera after that pause and then make their point. So there's a lot of things there. One of my favorite sayings that we learned from somebody else: seek first to understand and then to be understood. Because if you think about it, how many times are people formulating their response and their answer, and then I'm like, that's not even what I asked, dude. You're so fast to want to say what you're having to say. And so I have different, things that I do. I'll cross my fingers if I need to remember so that I can pay attention to what I want to say. Sometimes I'll say, excuse me, hold on a second. And then I'll go and get my pad and I'll write it down, because in the end, I want to be in the moment. And the only way to be in the moment sometimes for me, because my brain's going all the time, is I may have to write it down or cross a finger, sometimes two fingers, sometimes, your body's crossed or whatever the case may be. I think also stating the objective, being very clear in that objective. Say, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. What are you trying to accomplish? So we'll ask people about their WIIFM. Again, I'm a caption reader. I'm trying to think, what would they be trying to accomplish? And then I'll verify that with them versus assuming. So I just think there's a lot going on with that question, and hopefully we'll get a chance to break those things down as we move forward.
Perfect. You know, when you were talking about the saying, it's like the little kid that goes, sorry. And you know they're not sorry at all, right? So because the tone, it's not the word said sorry, but the tone and the body language said no.
Hey,
Right?
don't talk about my wife like that. She's not here to defend herself.
Oh, wasn't talking about her at all. All right, Robert, do you have another question?
Our next question is, how can I teach youth to actively listen?
You know, I think you have to experience listening. So, one of the things that I do is called inside outside circles. And what you do, if you have 20 kids, you put 10 in a circle, and then you have them go back to back so that they're facing out. And then you have the other 10 people go and stand in front of one of those people. And you ask them to talk about something. And when I ask them, sometimes I put people in inside outside circles because I really want them to talk about, I want to be able to debrief on the topic itself. But if I'm trying to teach you how to actively listen, I'm just going to have you be in these two circles and I'm going to ask you to talk. And I'm going to say, tell this person about your favorite food, right? And then when they're finished doing that, I give them about a minute and a half to talk and make sure that both sides have talked. Then I ask them, if they're in the inside circle, tell the person on the outside what they did that told you they were listening. And they'll go, oh, well, they were looking at me. They were nodding. They were right. So that you can go through that. So they've actually experienced it. And then on the other side, I might have the outside tell the inside what they did that made them know that they were truly telling them something important to them. And they'll say, well, they were animated. They were excited. They were using their hands. And so when we do that, it's about experiencing what that looks like, what active listening looks like. You have to do it, and then you have a better understanding. So for me, I would start by having it be an experience that the kids have, and then discussing the experience. So, Coach?
Yeah, I would say I like all of that a lot. Also, too, I think going back to there's nonverbal active listening, shaking your head, leaning forward. Eye expressions are a big deal. Like, I know sometimes, like when I'm consulting, a large group of leaders, 20, 30, 50 of them, they'll say something smart. I'll be like shaking my head and I'll look around and I'll point. And I'm like, did you hear this guy? Like this guy, he's a wizard. So I think you can, praise people. I think there's, all of that you can do. And I don't have to praise verbally. I can do it non-verbally. Right? I do this a lot. Like, yeah, that's really good. For those of you that are just listening and can't see, I'm pumping my fists like, yay, so on and so forth. Then I think you go into the verbal stuff, right? And so we do like repeating exercises, not to downgrade, because you can get a little goofy with that. It's like the coaching exercises side by side. I'm not a big fan of those because it can seem downgrading, but you can repeat. So what I think I heard you say is a blue shirt on Monday. Is that correct? No, I said a light blue shirt on Monday. Oh, okay, great. But then that way, again, you're wanting to make it very clear so that people have a really good understanding of exactly where you're at. And I know that for my wife, it's tough because I'll ask a bunch of questions in between. And she's like, just shut your face. I'm trying to get through this. And I'm like, well, I'm trying to, be in the moment and really listen and understand where you're at. She's like, I'd rather that you shut your face. So then I do the nonverbal of this. And so I shut my face that way. But I think those are good. The listening circles are good. Also just being self-aware, right? Because this, if I cross my arms, for those that can't, aren't watching right now, but just listening, if I cross my arms, that could mean that I'm mad or I'm standoffish or I'm not whatever. But it could also mean that I'm cold. So I'll ask people, hey, I noticed that you cross your arms. Are you being standoffish? And they're not used to that, right? They're not used to things being transparent and straight up. But I want to know, because if I said something that's offensive, I want to know. Now, I may not change my stance on it, but I would like to know, because I would be able to say to them, hey, I wasn't trying to be offensive, but I have a strong opinion on this, and I'm more than happy to hear your opinion to see if I change my stance. But I just know that for me, if I have a very strong opinion, it's been there over, months, days, years, centuries, whatever, so to speak. So I just think that there's a lot there. And ultimately, I just bring up the telephone game like we had talked about earlier. Again, you started in the circle and it's a blue giraffe on Monday, and it winds up, by the time it gets around to 20 people, it was a, red orangutan on, Saturday at noon or something. And you're like, how does that happen? Well, that just tells you how important communication is, and trying to factor in styles, nonverbals, verbals, exercises, repeats, skills, trying to do all of that. It's very difficult to put a good communication piece on both sides together.
Thank you. Okay, Robert, it's up to you.
Our next question is, what role does body language play in communication?
So I think that Coach really talked about that, like with arms closed, with hands on your hips, right? I don't know if you all call this, but I call it the mother look. When your mother looks at you and you think, I'm not doing that again, because if I do, I could be in big trouble. And I think that there are all kinds of nonverbal signals that we send all the time. And sometimes we're totally unaware of it. And sometimes, just like when Coach said, my arms are crossed. Well, is it because I'm shutting myself off, or is it because I'm cold, or because my arm hurt, or right? And so we have to ask. But I think that body language is huge. Morabian did a study, and this was pre-smartphone. I'd be curious for him to do it again. But he said that 7% of communication is the words, and about 33 to 35% is your tone, and the rest is your body language. And that people are reading that no matter what. And if you think about it, if you've ever been around a little kid, a little kid, like a toddler, if they're talking to you and you're not looking at them, they will physically take your face and turn it to them, because they get it that if you're not looking at them, you're not paying attention. They understand that on a core level. And a lot of times when you see people communicating with kids, they're multitasking. And what that says is, I'm not important enough to listen to. So I think that body language is huge. And Brett, you may have more to say on that.
Well, I think there's a lot to say. So let's talk about a different form of communication. Let's talk about written communication. So I know in the Bible, people will get confused on certain topics because where's the punctuation at, right? Or if you take it out of context. So in the Bible, it says, and God giveth and God taketh away. Well, what about in the context if that's a funeral where there's two kids sitting in the front row and their dad just passed away, sitting in that coffin, and they don't know a lot about God, and this pastor, this preacher gets up and says, and God giveth and God taketh away. They're like, I don't know who this God guy is, but I'm not real happy with him because they just took my father, right? So I think there's contextual, or if you look at certain things, not to get, try not to get too religious or too political because it'll polarize a room. But if you look at where the comma's at in there, today he will be with the Father in heaven. But if you switch up that comma, that can have a different look to it, right? And it's the same thing when you talk about the nonverbals, right? And so for me, I'm just this is comfortable for me. When I cross my arms, it's comfortable, right? When I scowl on my face, that's comfortable for me because that means I'm focused, I'm into it. When I point to my ear, I'm thinking, man, I need to really pay attention to the echoic ear part of it. I want to hear more because that's my best learning style. So, right, and that's why you have to ask people because everybody's a little bit different. And remember, perception is reality. I'm sure we'll get into that somewhere tonight on one of the questions. But I just think there's a lot that goes on with that. And then body language can either reinforce or contradict what's verbally coming out of their mouth. It can go both sides. It can go both ways. And then I talk about both the art and the science. So God, or whatever your modus operandi is, he gave me a really good ability to be discerning, right? So when I take the test, if 21's the top you can score on discernment, I score 21. But I've also done a lot of body language, the science part of it. So I know probably what's going on with people. I know that if they're covering their mouth, they probably really want to say something. I know that if they're tugging on their ear, they need more information. I know that if they're pointing to their brain, they're thinking about it. I know that if they look up, they're thinking about their brain on how to respond to it. So if you put the art, as we always say, and the science with this huge desire to do things well, man, that's a professional athlete. That's a home run or a grand slam. And that's what we have to look at, especially when it comes to communication. I've been with my wife 43 years. And sometimes I can go, hey, can you give me the thing over there by the deal and whatever? And she'll bring me my Carmex because she knows that's what I mean. There's other times when I'm thinking I'm being explicitly and implicitly both in saying, hey, can you bring me my phone? And she brings me a mouse. I'm like, how does that get mixed up for somebody who knows me that well? Well, it's because communication is difficult at best.
Absolutely. Okay, Robert, your turn. But before you do take your turn, how many people do we have listening? How many people are with us tonight?
Right now we have about, let me see, 5 on TikTok, and then we have 6 on Instagram, and 2 on YouTube right now.
All
Good. If
right.
everybody goes and grabs two, we'll have about 30 people.
There you go.
Yahoo. All right. So again, we're glad that you're all here. If you'd like to pose a question, that's something we've said that triggers something in your mind, or you'd like a specific, you've had a specific interaction that you'd like some second opinions on, be sure that you, if you can't talk it to us, then be sure that you can type it in anywhere so that Robert can see that and he can share that with us, because we really are grateful that you're here. Now, Robert, you can ask a question.
Okay, our next question is, how can I help youth improve their verbal communication skills?
Practice, practice, practice. If you are allowed to not speak, you aren't going to get good at speaking. It's not like one day you wake up and it's miraculous and you're able to speak, right? You have to practice. And so, how many opportunities do you give them? You should be giving them multiple opportunities every day. And sometimes they need to talk to just one other person, right? And practice. And you need to point out to them, if you've had them in inside outside circles and they've talked about that they need to nod and they need to lean in and they need to do all those things to communicate, then they should practice that with one other person. And then maybe after they pair, you could have them share with 4 people together in a group. So practice needs to happen often, but you don't always have to stand up in front of a large group to practice. You can practice with one other person, or you can practice with a small group. And maybe you're more comfortable until you build up that ability. And then I think you need to know that there are some kids who will never, ever want to talk to a group of 30 people. And that's okay. How else might they communicate? They could communicate their ideas with pictures, right? Or photographs, or by doing a project and displaying it. So you have to take that into consideration, but my answer to that is practice, practice, practice.
Yeah, don't tell Allen Iverson that. So I think back, I don't know, I'm not good with time frames, but 20 or 30 years ago, Allen Iverson was the point guard for the 76ers. And and one of the reporters was talking to him about practice because apparently he didn't, I don't remember the full story, but he didn't go to practice or something. And so he must have said 70 times, 50 times, 40 times, a bunch of times in 2 minutes. He's like, practice. It's practice. It's not a game. It's practice. And they still bring this up over the last 20 years because it's just hilariously funny, right? But in this case, Gmaw's right. Practice, practice, and then practice some more. One of the big things that I say as far as improving the verbals is talking touch points. So I try to keep things as simple as I can. I believe that the greatest teacher of all time, besides Gma, my mother, was Jesus, or maybe Jesus was a little bit better. And what he did was talk in touch points, or what we label as touch points. And a touch point is a parable, a story. It is a maybe a metaphor, a quote. I mean, you name it. It's something like that. And you guys know as well as I do, when you hear a story, it's going to stick in your head far greater than it is if we just lecture it out. And that's why movies, the one-liners in movies stand the test of time, because that's a story, that's a touch point, or different things of that nature. Number two, have a place. So I listen to this old man preach. He may have passed away, but you guys would know him. I forget his name right now, but I listen to him a lot. And he said when he would pray, he always had a place. When he was a little kid, he said he had a woodshed. And when he was older, he had his own place in his own house where he would go face down and talk to God. So for us, we have several places, but one of them was the car. When my kids were unable to drive, we knew in there wasn't going to be music or different things. I knew I was only going to get 5 or 10 minutes with them. So that was our place to communicate. And so everybody had to communicate. This was not a choice. You had to go around the campfire, so to speak, and communicate. So I think having a place is very important. We have a place on Sundays where we go to GMA's one Sunday, the next Sunday we go to our house, and back and forth. We have a place, and everybody gets a chance to talk. Some people more than others, but that's fine, right? But gets a chance, and iron sharpens iron, and practice is practice. And we say this isn't something that, I mean, there's certain days where people are like, I'm just not feeling good, I'm a little grumpy. Good, then you don't have to talk. But on most days, the practice is that you are going to be able to share and different things of that nature. The other thing is that to help the kids is have them describe it. And I like really doing this across the board, which ties back to the touch points, but also describe it, like, because then you could double into it with how they're feeling, what they're thinking, how they responded. Well, describe that how you did, right? And so I think all of these things help you to be able to be a more effective communicator. Talk with your hands, make sure that you're trying to be aware of their caption. If you're a kinesthetic, say, hey, everybody, I want you to write this down, or I want you to play with your pencil, or different things of that nature as well.
Thanks. Okay, Robert, you're up.
All right. Our next question is: what are effective strategies for teaching public speaking?
Practice. Practice. No, I think when you're speaking in public, one of the things that they tell you is that you need to state, this is what I'm going to tell you about, right? Define the 3 points you're going to make the 3 points, sum it up at the end and say, this is what I told you about, right? And that sounds like that they tell you that that's how to write a paragraph too, right? Or an essay. But the thing that's important is this. Most of us do not hear it the first time, right? How many times have you seen the same commercial and finally you go, oh, I get it. I see what that's about, right? Because you're not really paying attention. And so when we do public speaking, we need to first of all, let people know what we're going to share with them. So I'm going to talk with you tonight about communication and different ways to do that and why it's so important. Okay. And then you make your points and then you recap it. So I think that you do that by practicing, but you can also sit down and have them brainstorm. Okay, what are the 3 things that you want to say? Is there a story that goes with any of those, so that they're working it through, so that they have an idea of what they're going to say, and then they can take notes with them, or they can memorize it, right? That's up to them. But what they need to do is practice enough that they are not so afraid when they're doing it, right? And they can practice in front of the mirror. They can practice in front of a friend. They can practice, right? So that they just need to practice. But you can help them organize their thoughts so that they can do that well in public.
Yeah, so, I think that practice thing is going to come up on most all of the questions. One of the things that I say is inch by inch is a cinch, mile by mile takes a while. So I say, have them get in front of the mirror. And that's going to be probably the worst thing that they can do. But they're by themselves. So if they mess up or they stutter or whatever, right? I mean, think about GMA or myself. We're professional speakers. We're teachers, for goodness sakes, right? And we say stuff that doesn't connect sometimes, right? That's just going to be part of it. Yeah. And like I've said before, when I was teaching people the shot or the disc, that spinning motion, just go keep spinning, and they eventually fall down. And I go, okay, now what? You're going to make mistakes. You're going to stumble on yourself. You're going to do different things of that nature. So that's okay. But start with the mirror, then go with something low stakes, right? Just a low stake speaking task, whatever that may be for them. Maybe it's ordering. Can I get a number one? Right? Very low stakes. If they mess it up and they were supposed to get a number two, their parent can help to, correct that, make sure they get a burrito instead of a hamburger or whatever the case may be. Then I like to say the next inch by inch or the next step is just with a partner, somebody that they're comfortable with. Then you could go into small groups or switch them up with the partner that they're not so comfortable with, right? You can do either direction on that. Then you could go into small groups and so on and so forth. And then, like GMA said, I say the exact same thing in a different way. Tell them, tell them, tell them. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Then you tell them what you just said you were going to tell them. And at the end, you tell them again for review, right? So tell them, tell them, tell them. And so that makes it very simple for them. And I know GMA and I, we create a bunch of different things. And within our Nifty 9, which people could purchase in our online store, one of the things is holistic instruction. And we have a format for that. And we have an opening, we have the content, we have a closing. And in the opening, we say, when you're teaching a lesson, state the objective. Today, we're going to do a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Then the next thing you're going to do is ask about prior knowledge. So that's it. That's the whole opening, right? Then what you're going to do in the content piece is you're going to teach them. You're going to teach them how to be able to do that, right? And for the younger kids, it may be one step at a time. For the older kids, maybe it's you're going to give it all to them, see if there's any questions. And then the second part of that content, that piece or that middle piece, is they're going to practice. Shocker. We've said that 10 times a night, 110 times. So they're going to practice. Then you stop. You do teaching moments. Hey, at the beginning we said that you have to cut it diagonally, but I saw over here little Johnny cut it in half or fours or took the crust off or whatever. Does that really matter? Well, no or yes. And, we have debates and discussions. And in the end, I say, well, it probably doesn't matter because it goes in one hole and it comes out another hole eventually, right? So to speak. And then we go into the last part, which is the closing, which is the review piece, which is what the adult says are the 1, 2, or 3 things that they thought was most important about the lesson. And then we go into the last part of it, which is a reflection, which the kid says that. And we happen to do that in a very specific way. Confirmation, tweaks, aha. And so they would say, hey, my confirmation today was that it doesn't really matter whether we cut it diagonal or in half or inside out or no crust, whatever. And somebody else says, oh, my complete aha moment was that it goes in one hole and goes out the other. I never thought about it like that. And then my tweak was whatever it would be. So this is holistic instruction. And so you can give them that, or you can give them what GMA said, or you can just say, tell them again, and then tell them one more time, right? So whatever the age group is and the ability level, I think that's what's important on how you decide to format that for them.
Absolutely. So thank you. All right, Robert, you're up.
What role does empathy play in effective communication?
Well, I think empathy plays into almost everything. Empathy is about trying to understand the other person, their position, their perspective, where they stand, what they see. So if you could imagine a giant ice cream cone, right? And all of Baskin and Robbins' 31 flavors were scattered throughout that ice cream cone. And you had a big circle around that. And some of the ice cream scoops had sprinkles and others had Oreos, and right, it would all be different. And that's what perspective is. It's from your vantage point. And if you're standing on the right side of a cone, what you're seeing is not the left side of the cone. So what you try and do is communicate and have that person communicate clearly enough with you so that you at least have an understanding of what the left side of the cone looks like. Because otherwise, until you can rotate around and physically see it for yourself, you are reliant. So when I am here, what I see is Brett. And I see his cards that are behind him. I see the jerseys, right? I see all those things. And that's my perspective. That's what I see. But that's not what he sees when he looks at me. What he sees when he looks at me are several pictures, a yellow tray, right? And so if we're talking and we're not communicating, then I'm thinking he's seeing what I see. And he's thinking I see what he sees. And that's what we mean by perspective, right? So perspective is trying to understand. And when we communicate with empathy, I want to know what you're seeing, not just what I'm seeing, but what you're seeing as well. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What do you think those words said? How do you feel about it? And that to me is the value of empathy. It is trying to truly understand, not agree, not agreement, but understand the other person's perspective. How do they see the cone that's sitting in the middle? So, Brett, I'll pitch that to you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that can be said on this, right? So empathy, it fosters a deeper understanding and deeper connection ultimately, right? If I can empathize with where you're at, meaning I can walk in your shoes, that's why I tell people, people open up to me for some crazy reason, even though I got a scowl on my face and I look grumpy all the time. But I think what they find out really fast is I have a lot of opinions, but I do not judge. I'm not here to judge anybody because that's not my role. But I do have my opinions, and people go, "Oh, that's semantics." I'm like, no, it's not, because judgment says right or wrong. Opinion says this is my opinion on what you're saying or what you're thinking. But I really like to walk in their shoes, or what I call it is captain uh, uh, caption. That's a tongue twister. I mess it up every time. I need to put another alliterative word together on that. But I look at people's caption all the time, trying to walk in their shoes, so to speak. Another way is on empathy, and what Gmal was saying. You know, if I'm looking at it from north to south, and somebody else sees it from east to west or back, that's why a wreck, you get 20 different accounts, right? This person said no, they slammed on their brakes. This person said, well, the reason they slammed on their brakes because the cat darted out in front. This person, right? And so that's why you get all these different perspectives or perceptions. And I really think those two words are tough. And so, you know, I'm not saying that my definition's right on this, but I'm saying the way that I try to look at it is that the perception is what you notice or what you sense. And then the perspective is how you understand it, your opinion about it. Now, I'm not saying that's right, but that's how I look at it. And so I want to talk very quickly. Thank you. I want to talk really quickly about perception. And your perception is your reality, but it doesn't mean that it's real. Let me share a touch point with you on that. So there was a guy that was sitting in a subway, and he had his hands on his face, and he was looking down. And he had two kids on that same subway, and they were running amok. They thought that they were on the jungle gym, like monkeys running around, whatever. So all the people on the subway, it was crowded. They were starting to get mad and upset because this whatever, apparently the dad, which is what it was in this case, but they didn't know that. But the man, and it wasn't the dad, was like, why aren't you doing something, dude? You need to reprimand your kids. You need to get them under control, so on and so forth. So eventually one of the biggest dudes on the subway went up and stood above the guy that was looking down or whatever. And he goes, hey man, what's your problem? Your kids are running amok. Why don't you do something about it? And so the guy that was the dad, who had his hands kind of over his face and looking down, he dropped his hands and he looked up and he said, well, I don't know this for sure, but I can guess the reason they're running amok because we just left the hospital, and my wife of 20 years and their mom just passed away. And I sure don't know how to deal with it, so I'm guessing they don't either. Whoa! So the people who are listening to this, they went from being mad and upset, their perception that this guy wasn't doing anything about their kids, and then they were, hey, come here, little guy, let me read to you. And another one, right? And another one consoled the dad, you know. So what we need to understand is that our perception is our reality, but that doesn't mean that it's real and it can't change in a blink of an eye, so to speak. So we need to be understanding. And when we go back to empathy, yeah, well, you have to have a good perception of what's real, not just your perception, which may be off base. And if you don't have that, you can't be empathetic. And if you can't be empathetic, then you can't help anybody out, the kids or the dad. Now, sometimes the dad needs to get, you know, a little elbow or something. But in this case, that wasn't where it was at. So perception is reality, but it doesn't mean that it's real.
You know, I call that those adding increments of meaning, right? So, and you can do that with your kids in communication. You can set up a scenario and they'll all go, oh, well, this is blah, 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 right? And then you say, well, what if I told you this? Oh, well, then it, right? And so that they can start with this iterative story, and you keep adding increments of meaning, one more understanding, and it helps them to realize that maybe, just maybe, I'm not seeing this for all it is. Maybe I need to check it out. Maybe as part of my communication, I need to check and say, okay, this is what I'm thinking. What's really going on here? So yeah, I really appreciate that because it's the truth.
And why don't you tell them now's, I think, a good time too to talk to them about the communication cycle that it, you know, forms in your heart. And you've said that before, but I think that'd be good now too.
Okay. So when you want to communicate, it's because something stirs in you that you want to share, right? Because there are times, I'm sure, if you're like me, that there's nothing stirring and I don't want to talk to anybody, right? But there's times when I think, oh, I need to say that. I need to be a part of that. So it starts with the feeling. And then what happens is we move that feeling up into our mind so that we can capture the right words. And then we speak those words. And I bet you've all experienced before saying something and you can tell the second you say it that it did not land well with the other person. And then you start to, oh, I didn't mean it that way, blah, blah, blah. But what we think is that it goes from your mouth directly to their ears. And the fact of the matter is it does not. It goes from your mouth into whatever circumstances there are that you may or may know nothing about. So think about this. Think about the touch point of the man and the kids in the subway, right? It went into the gentleman's, he's got this feeling he needs to do something. He finally comes over, he's going to say it. He says it in the best possible way he can. And then those words went into all these circumstances. So the response wasn't probably what he expected, right? Because the circumstances changed it. But after it goes through circumstances, then it goes to the other person's ears or into their ears, then into their brain and down into how they feel. The thing of it is that all happens in a nanosecond. It goes back and forth very, very quickly. And that's why we try and build relationships with people. That way we can have a semblance of understanding of their circumstance. That's why you learn to read body language, because that way you have a possibility of understanding circumstance. Otherwise, you don't. So it moves like lightning. And so I'll do with you what I would have done. I do this with people all the time. I'm going to say one word, and it's going to be a word you know. And I want you to take a snapshot in your brain. The second, don't overthink it. Just come up with a picture. Okay. So here we go. Mother. All right. So I'm going to tell you that I know what you saw was someone who came down to the bus stop every day to carry your books and talk to you on your walk home. That's what you saw, right? And you're going, no, that's not what I saw. Well, that's what my mother did, which is why I see it that way. That's what I think mothers should do because of that. So when we communicate, we already have this going on in our head. This is what we think. And then when we toss it out there and it lands awkwardly, or it doesn't land at all what we were thinking, then the communication can either stop, which is not a good thing, or they'll, well, I don't know, why did you say that, blah, blah, right? It can go back and forth. So just know that communication, even the simplest of words, does not mean the same thing to everybody.
Hey, Robert, before you ask the next question, what came to your mind when you heard mother, just out of curiosity?
To my mind, what just came a sweet person, my mom's face. It's not about her.
Your mom's face.
Yeah.
It was real easy for me to see my mom's face because it's right there in
It's right
front of me.
there.
Right. But it's different, right? You didn't see the same things that I saw, right?
Correct.
And that's the difference, I think, between your perspective is guided by your own reality, right? And that's just the way it is. So, Robert, now it's your turn.
Our next question is, how can I encourage youth to ask thoughtful questions?
Inquiry. Actually, I was in Stockton today, and that was the topic for 3 hours. We talked about inquiry and asking questions and all of that. And one of the ways that I think we help young people ask thoughtful questions is to not default to always answering. It seems like as an adult, you're hardwired to answer every question they ask. Now, if they ask you, what time is it? Okay, it's 6:47, right? And so by all means answer that. But when they ask you something else, how should I do this problem? Why are you going to think for them? Because what all they did was, it's like tennis. They lobbed the ball over to you and said, how do I do this? And you're going to immediately take control of the game. And the fact of the matter is, we need to lob it back. And we need to say things like, when they ask questions that are not like just obvious answers, like looking at the clock or what day is today. I think we need to ask a question back. What were you thinking when you asked that question? What sort of answer are you hoping for me to give you? Ask questions that start with what and how yourself, which are open-ended questions, to get them to think about asking questions. Because when they ask a question that's kind of nonsensical, you can guess what they're talking about, and you might even know, but it doesn't help them learn to ask better questions if you don't answer or you don't ask questions back. One of the greatest teachers the world has ever known was Socrates, and he did not answer questions. He asked questions back. And I think that we need to really consider that. If I want you to ask a thoughtful question, I have to model thoughtful question asking. And then I need to point out that I'm being thoughtful and modeling question asking, because I'm not going to assume you're going to catch it just because I do it. So that's my thoughts. How about yours?
Yeah. So it's funny. I was listening to one of your favorite guys, Simon Sinek, today. He was on one of the podcasts I listened to, and he was talking about that. The guy asked him, like, who was one of your greatest bosses or something along those lines. And he said his first boss, whatever his name was. And he said, why was that? And he said, because he never answered any of the questions that I asked him. So he said he would ask him a question, and the guy would go, oh, thanks for letting me know that. What are you going to do about it? Right? And he always just would put it back on them to where it was like, I'm not answering your questions for you. You can answer those questions for yourself. And so I thought that was funny because I know you like him quite a bit. This is where I would put it in what I call a system or a process or procedure. I call it the Wiley W's. And so that is the why, who, what, when, where, and then the how is spelled backwards. So it could be W's. That's how brilliant I am sometimes. And so I think that, when you're thinking about thoughtful questions, yes, the open-ended questions, the what or the how would be at the top of the food chain. But I think you can put it in the Wiley W's, or you can call them the W's or whatever you want to be able to say. And the only other thing I have to add, because I think GMA did a good job with that, is we used to have a question of the day that would spark all kinds of, discussion. And sometimes we would ask questions and it would go for 2 minutes because it wasn't a very good question, or they weren't interested in it, or whatever. And there were other times where it could go for, an hour or 50 minutes or something. So, but having that as a mainstay, as a practice, I like to do it typically after lunch, right? They're in a food coma or they're tired from running around or whatever. And so that would kind of regenerate the juices for the latter half of the day, so to speak. So those would be the two things I would say.
I agree with that. I just want to add one of the insights of the people today that I was working with on inquiry. They said, "Oh, curiosity leads to inquiry," right? And so sometimes to help kids, we need to help them be curious, to wonder, right? And how many times do we just overlook things? I wonder why when I look out my window in the morning that the sun's coming straight at my face and other times it's not. I wonder why that happens, right? It's the same window, I'm in the same chair, and the sun doesn't do the same thing. So why does that happen? Have you ever wondered why worms are on the sidewalk after a rain? Were they drowning? Is that why they came out? Why are they there? Because they're going to end up dying on the sidewalk. But so what happens? Why do those leaves fall? Why do they turn colors? Right? Why am I hungry after eating blah and I'm totally full after eating blah? Right? I think that we have, when you look at what we do to kids, we swoosh out curiosity and wonder. And so if you don't have wonder and curiosity, why would you ever ask a question? And if you can ask an adult and they'll do all the thinking for you, why would you have to be curious? You know where to go to get the answer. So I just think it's important that we understand that curiosity is foundational to question asking.
You must have done a good job with me, GMA, because I said you must have done a good job with me because I'm a curious dude and I question everything all the time. Like you used to say back in the day, I drove you crazy as a kid, but I made an okay adult. And the second thing you said is you would not be good in the Army because that's what everybody was getting shot at. I'd be like, well, why are they shooting at us? Why wouldn't they shoot here? Why, and they're like, get down, you knucklehead. You're getting ready to get shot. I'm like, oh, okay. So anyway, you did a good job, GMA.
Yeah, thank you. But question asking is important, right? But you got to be curious. So if I were to start somewhere to get kids to ask better questions and all that, I would start with teaching them to wonder and be curious and go, right? And that's all that's a question. And it's the beginning of a great one. So I think that, shall we move forward, Brett? Do you think?
Yeah, one more. When you said, I go, things that make you go, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more, Robert, don't you?
Yes, we have time for one more. Our next question is: what activities build confidence in communication?
So I was being a jerk, so let me ask it again. Yeah.
Going, say that question again.
Okay, so what activities build confidence in communication?
Practicing.
Things that make you go, huh? Things that make you go, huh, and practice. Okay, you guys have a great night. We're 5 minutes.
So I think that there are all kinds of things. One of the things that I think is really important to understand is this. We all live in Western culture, okay? And in Western culture, debate is a great format. It's not really communication, but it's saying your part, right? Communication is a two-way street, but debate's about telling your part. And in a debate, what it is I'm right, you're wrong, listen to my points and do what I say, right? And we often do that, and we think that that's communication. It's not. Then sometimes we say, okay, I want to be nicer about that. So we're going to have a discussion. And what happens is that I'm listening to you, but I'm not really listening to you because I'm really planning what I'm going to say back to you. So I'm not doing active listening. I'm not doing my part at all. And I take it in, and then I tell you why I'm right and you're wrong and you ought to do what I say. Both of those are not about communication. Communication is truly about dialogue. It's about being able to say, I don't have a pony in this race. And when you say that and you mean it, then what you're doing is you're saying, I'm open to hearing you. And when you're open to hearing another person, you have established a framework in which communication can take place. But when I look at debate, really and truly, debate is I'm right, you're wrong. And if I didn't want to say it nicely, I would say, so shut up and sit down, right? I mean, I'm right. There's no further discussion needed. That's not communication. It's not communication when you are listening to pounce on a person. It's communication when you are listening to understand and you are trying to be as clear as possible and you are responding to one another's questions and thoughts. That's communication. Otherwise, you are simply having a conversation. So I want to just take a second to do this. So I want you to visualize two people that are significant others to one another. And they're in their cars. And one of them calls the other and says, hey, you want to go out of town this weekend? And that person goes, yes. But what they see in their head is a resort. What the person who asked the question sees in their head is a campfire and camping out. And then the person says, we'll be able to sit by the fire. And this person over here at the resort's going, woohoo, right? And this person's going, yeah, we'll make s'mores. How awesome will that be? Anyway, they go through and they have a conversation, but nobody checks for understanding. So when they talk about seeing the lights, one's seeing stars and the other one's seeing the cityscape, right? It goes back and forth. And then what happens is when they get to the house together and one's got the tent and the other one's got, a designer dress, somebody's mad. And they say, well, you didn't, right? Nobody communicated. They just had a conversation. And I think it's really important for us to understand the difference because a conversation can be about anything that doesn't really matter. But communication means that you and I think Brett must say to me 1,000 times, we got to be on the same page. We got to be on the same page. We got to have the same understanding of the same language over and over, because otherwise all we are doing is having a conversation. We are not communicating. So that's my last 2 cents. And so Brett, it's your last 2 cents. You got a minute.
Yeah, if that. I was just thinking about Susan and I when we went to the beach last. I'm like, Best Western, because I'm a tightwad, right? I don't like spending money. And she's like, the Hilton or whatever is more expensive. And so I happened to win that little battle. So we went to Best Western. She says, I'm never going to Best Western again. And I said, well, at least I didn't take you camping, so to speak. But yeah, I think that there's a system, a self-organizing group that will help that to build confidence because they can rotate the positions. There can be the recorder, then there can be the person that shares out. There can be the brainstormers. There can be the encouragers, which gets them to kind of share out. So I like to be a respecter of people's time. So that's 7 o'clock. I could say a few other things, but that's the down and dirty basics of the answer to that.
All right. So thank you so much for joining us. Have a great